What do you get when you judge a man by his jacket and nearly pay for it? With your life, Keanu Reeves. Boarded flight 227, alone in a denim jacket and a frayed backpack. No entourage, no first-class arrogance. Beside him sat a quiet man from Burkina Faso whom everyone mistook for a threat. What they didn't know, one of them was a global icon, the other a sitting president, and when fear turned to chaos at 370 feet, they didn't panic. They kept everyone alive before we drop into this narrative. Let us know where on the planet you are tuning in. Comment below with city or country. We love witnessing how far such stories reach. The plane hung like a mirror, Leviathan attached to the jet bridge, its fuselage glittering in late afternoon sunlight. Flight 227 from Casablanca to Geneva was the sort of flight piloted by diplomats, hedge fund managers, and European aristocrats who favored discretion rather than flash within the business class. Cabin breathed wealth with each gleaming surface and subtle designer fragrance. The seats were butter-soft leather in a soft curve and lit by warm golden light. Champagne poured into crystal rather than plastic, and menus were embossed on heavy linen paper. A hush descended on the aisle as boarding reached halfway. A flight attendant tucked the collar of her navy blazer tray, loaded with stemware, in one hand, while another restocked the bergamot diffuser slyly concealed above the bulkhead. And then he boarded alone. He did not walk as if accustomed to this world. No swagger, no phone clutched in hand. Just peaceful, earthy gait boots, worn scuffed from actual use, not crafted distress. His beat-up denim jacket hung loose over a black t-shirt, and a canvas backpack over one shoulder seemed more appropriate in a train station than this airborne lounge. Some noticed him. A flicker of recognition danced across a few faces, but most passengers didn't look up from their tablets or Bordeaux after all. Why would Keanu Reeves board the Keanu Reeves board? Alone, dressed like a roadie between gigs. He paused at row 14, checked his ticket. 14B, with a small nod, he lowered himself into the seat, careful not to jostle the glass of sparkling water waiting beside the armrest. He pulled out an old paperback from his pocket coat and opened it, quietly. Posture, relaxed legs crossed, no sunglasses, no sound across the aisle. Carter Langston lifted his gaze from his Rolex with bored interest. Mid-40s, tailored tan suit. Zurich climbed English. Carter didn't have to say a great deal to be heard. Intriguing, he whispered to his wife, swirling his wine first class, accepting hitchhikers. Now his wife laughed just loud enough. Keanu turned a page seconds later. Another man boarded, tall, dark-skinned, perhaps mid-40s, broad-shouldered under a crumpled brown field jacket. He moved with the air of someone who'd been trained to size up a room without appearing to know insignia, no flash, merely quiet watchfulness. He entered. 14C nodded politely. Sat. Carter blinked. "Oh," he said with a smile, winking, gesturing discreetly. "Didn't know they allowed bodyguards to sit with their clients." Neither man answered. Keanu continued reading. The other man, whose name no one felt like asking, stared out the window at the runway, face inscrutable. But something had changed in the atmosphere. Something colder than height and keener than judgment. They had no idea who these two men were, and that was their second mistake. Carter Langston wasn't finished. He never was, particularly when the target didn't blink. He'd made a career out of one principle. Discomfort was power, and currently the silence from 14B and 14C was beginning to resemble resistance. He couldn't stand it. He leaned back in his seat, eyes scanning the cabin. Everything was immaculate. Leather, linen, luxury, everything but them, the man in denim who hadn't touched his phone, and the tall, silent stranger beside him who had barely blinked. Then 2 rows ahead, A voice broke the tension. "Oh my God, you guys came." The hushed, breathy tone of Jessica Wynn, an influencer with 500,000 followers and a craving for relevance. She had positioned her phone just so, front camera on voice in a whispered lilt. "I believe Keanu Reeves is on this flight, or, like, possibly his homeless twin. And sitting next to him, this guy looks like Wakanda meets Narcos." Her live stream chat erupted with laughing emojis and fire gifs. She bit her lip to stifle a giggle, then panned her camera just enough to catch the backs of Keanu and Ibrahim's heads, before snapping it away, pretending innocence on the other side of the aisle. Carter appreciated the wisecrack, and he ran with it. "At least remind your bodyguard not to wear a rebel jacket in European airspace," he said. "There is tension in row 14. Twirling his Bordeaux with practiced elegance. "Wouldn't wish Swiss customs to believe you're importing AKs still nothing. Nothing from row 14 but tension in the air." It was thick now, like champagne poured too quickly. Foaming over with unspoken accusations, the flight attendant appeared with menus, her smile tight but practiced. "Mr. Langston," she said softly, "may I take your order?" Carter gave her a gracious nod. "Yes, of course, I'll have Bordeaux." And for them he gestured lazily with his wine glass toward Keanu and Ibrahim, maybe something in plastic, in case they're not used to crystals. The smile on her face cracked for a split second. Just enough. Keanu looked up, then not sharply, not angrily, just looked the kind of look that might unravel a man in silence. But before he would be able to speak, the man sitting next to him, "I did not drink," Ibrahim said, levelly, his tone low and full of French-African rhythm. "But thank you for your solicitude." Jessica blew softly into her phone. "Ooh, a classy terrorist bet. He's got great posture and handcuffs." It was no longer mocking. It was cruelty, padded on velvet seats and camouflaged as jokes. Arter smiled wider. Keanu closed his book and leaned back. Eyes closed for a moment. He had been here before. Not on this flight, not in this suite, but in this space. This altitude of arrogance, he knew what came next. And so did Ibrahim, because while the engines purred steady overhead, something far more dangerous had begun to stir under the skin of the cabin assumption entitled "Poisonous and Now Airborne." It started quietly, a glance over the shoulder, a whisper behind a menu, the gentle lean of a wine glass that concealed a nod in direction of row 14. The business class section of Flight 227, once soaked in soft music and passive opulence, had become a slow, burning drama of judgment. Not a single loud outcry, but a series of looks. Murmurs, assumptions passed, like folded tickets, between the rich. The ripple had started. "I just don't feel comfortable," growled a woman in row 11 to her husband, who was wearing a Mlance pen like a medal around his collar. "He hasn't touched his drink. He keeps scanning the aisle." "Military, maybe? Or pretending to be?" Her husband growled in assent. "Not Swiss, that's for sure." Jessica, still fixed to her phone, whispered to her chat. "Guys, the atmosphere is so Homeland Season 3 tonight. This field jacket guy hasn't blinked in 10 minutes. She zoomed in unobtrusively, capturing Ibrahim's profile in silhouette against the cabin window jawline. Sharp eyes intent, her audience flooded in reactions, glances suspect undercover scheme, twist on the way. 2 seats down, Carter leaned back with a hammy sigh and slung one arm over his wife. "Libya," he announced abruptly, loud enough to shatter the cabin's tenuous hum. His voice traveled like a stone in quiet water. "You look like the sort mercenary work, perhaps. Or were you on the losing end?" Ibrahim didn't even turn his head. But Keanu did. His eyes slowly rose from his paperback like breaching a deeper sea. He met Carter, stare with one that didn't blink, didn't posture, didn't require volume, just presence. Carter's smirk faltered for half a breath. Then Ibrahim reached over 2 fingers on Keanu's wrist. A gentle cue. Not yet, Keanu nodded and went back to his book. From behind them, a man in a dark gray suit muttered to his companion, "That guy in 14C, do you think he's got something?" His friend frowned. "They should inspect the bag. He hasn't opened it yet." Suspicion grew like mold, slow and easy to ignore, until it overwhelmed the air. A flight attendant. Emily came down the row with a practiced smile and the dessert card in hand. She was young, Cameroonian, with 5 languages. She spoke for diplomacy was her name. Tag shone against her navy uniform as she presented the choice. "Mr. Langston, would you like fruit? Or the mousse chocolat?" Carter blinked at her as if she'd said, "Swahili, can I get someone who speaks real French?" He asked louder than he needed to. Not whatever dialect this is. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. Amal's smile twitched, but remained. She nodded. "Of course, sir," as she turned. Ibrahim's hand bunched into a still fist on the armrest. His jaw clenched. Keanu looked sideways. "You okay?" he muttered under his breath. Ibrahim did not respond immediately. "I've seen people like him before," he said at last. "Different uniform, same need to feel big by shrinking others." Keanu nodded. "You ever stand up to Ibrahim's gaze? Did not falter, not with words. Hey, are you still with us before we go on? If you're still here watching, drop a 2 in the remarks to inform us we notice you." The engines whispered a constant lullaby at 37,000 feet. An engine purr that normally sent business-class travelers off into naps or Netflix. But not today. Not in row 14. Keanu's lids drifted shut again, though his stance was erect. Ibrahim hadn't budged in close to 20 minutes. His breathing was normal. His eyes glued to clouds outside the window. Beyond, the Mediterranean unrolled like a glass blanket inside. The quiet was heavy-laden, like a storm waiting for a spark. It arrived in the body of a man staggering up from the economy. He was not wearing business attire. Wrinkled polo shirt, hanging sagging jeans, a bulging shoulder bag, which had obviously survived too many years and not nearly enough washes. He staggers half supported by the walls of the aisle. The faint odor of vodka behind him. Passengers turned, eyebrows arched. The man paused by row 14, just stood there, panting, swaying slightly. His hand clutched his bag with an urgency that didn't equate to his vacant expression. Carter picked up on right away. "Oh, this should be good." He grumbled loud enough for several rows to hear, "That one's had more to drink than IQ points." Jessica sat up straight in her seat. "Wait, this guy wasn't in business class." "OMG," she whispered to her stream phone in hand again. "Now he's hovering near the Wakanda guy." The man muttered something incoherent. Then his eyes met Ibrahim's. A beat elapsed. Carter leaned forward. "Don't you find it interesting," he asked no one in particular, "that the only one this drunk guy looks at is our friend in the rebel jacket?" He addressed the older man next to him. "You seein' this Middle Eastern or North African right? Definitely trained somewhere." From row 12, a pearl-draped woman whispered, "That panic erupts mid-flight jacket. It's not European, should we say something?" The whispers were no longer private. The cabin had become a tension chamber, sealed, pressurized, flammable. Keanu's brow furrowed. The drunk man's fingers twitched close to the zipper of his bag. Not nervous twitching, intentional. Then came the spark. The man muttered, "Silence. That's what you want, isn't it?" His hand closed on the zipper. A gasp sounded out from row 15. Someone stood up. Another person reached for call button. Jessica held her phone. Out toward the aisle, in a hushed voice, "Something's happening. You guys look at this." Carter's shout cut through the bedlam. "He's with them. He's one of them." And he stabbed a finger out directly at Ibrahim. Pandemonium broke out. Someone shrieked, a man pushed past his seatmate. A wine glass splattered. A bottle exploded. The aisle erupted into a whirl of arms. Gasps, metal tinkling, and fluttering napkins. A flight attendant dumped a dessert tray as she scrambled backward. The drunk man started unzipping the bag and revealing wires, a battery pack, blinking lights. Chaos spiraled, and at the center of it all, Keanu stood up, voice calm. Everyone back away. But Ibrahim was already getting to his feet. No fear, no hesitation. The moment for silence was over. Time didn't help it. Collapsed one moment. The bag was half open. The next, Ibrahim took 3 steps. That was all it took. The first knocked over Carter's half-empty Bordeaux, pouring deep red over his tailored suit. The second shifted his weight with surgical precision. And the third, a blur of controlled power, sent him within arm's reach of the would-be assailant. The man with the bag hardly had time to recognize what was happening. Ibrahim's boot landed first, a clean sidekick to the wrist, sending the bag sliding along the aisle. It slammed into a seat with a thud, the wires inside cascading out like a nest of electric snakes. A red LED blinks. Someone screamed. The assailant lunged wildly. More flail than fight wrong move. Ibrahim caught his wrist mid. Swing twisted sharply and shoved the man's torso down with a calculating push of his, in 2 movements, knee to spine, palm to temple. The man was subdued and groaning on the cabin floor. Keanu was already there, belt in hand, while Ibrahim held the man down. Keanu wrapped the belt tight around his wrists, double wrapping the leather and pulling it tight with calm, practiced force. The attacker fought hard for a second, then froze. Out of breath, out of options. The whole cabin waited with bated breath. Jessica's phone fell from her hand and dropped to the floor. Her live stream had been dead seconds, but the damage was already done. Millions of viewers had already witnessed her smiling face. Before the panic set in, a flight attendant stooped beside the open bag. Shaking hands, she examined the wires. It's fake," she whispered quietly. Batteries, speakers, no detonator relief didn't come. Only silence, that heavy, awful kind of silence that doesn't follow disaster, but exposes truth. Amelie stood near the galley, hand over her heart, trying to slow her breathing. Her eyes were wide locked on Ibrahim. She had watched every move, watched how controlled it was, how professional Carter, still dripping wine, tried to speak. Nothing came out. Keanu stood slowly, wiping his hands on a napkin. He glared at Ibrahim, who hadn't uttered a word since the take-on. Then he turned to the others. "You all saw it," he said, voice low but firm. "He didn't hesitate. He didn't panic. He saved everyone here." Silence. Some nodded slowly, but others particularly. Those who had whispered loudest just looked at Ibrahim, still attempting to make sense of what had just transpired with everything they had presumed minutes prior, the drunk. Attacker muttered incoherently under them. His power was lost. His threat emptied like a balloon. What was left wasn't terror. It was shame. Carter finally spoke up, trembling. "I didn't know." Ibrahim's expression was unreadable. He didn't respond. He didn't need to, because everyone else knew they had condemned the man in row 14C and he'd saved them. Anyway, the drunk man was tied face against the cabin floor, his breath hitching in ragged gasps, his bag harmless. Now lay abandoned beneath a seat, its knotted wires still quivering to a plane's subtle motions. But the real disturbance wasn't on the floor. It was upright, quiet, and standing in seat. 14 travelers still hadn't returned to their seats. The silence wasn't because of fear any longer. It was something else. Embarrassment, understanding, a reckoning. Taking hold at 37,000 feet, Carter frozen Bordeaux dry like blood, spreading across his lapel. He hadn't uttered another sound. Jessica. Her cell phone, limp on her lap, looked at the back of Ibrahim's head, as if it contained the answer to a test. She flunked. Keanu stood on his feet, observing the cabin, observing the ripple of guilt spread around them. Then Amelie moved forward. Her hands trembled, but not her voice. "Sir," she said to Ibrahim with hushed deference, may I have the pleasure of knowing your name?" Ibrahim finally turned his face impassive, until now relaxed slightly. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat. Not hastily, not slowly, just deliberate. Measured from it, he pulled out a thin leather wallet and opened it. A diplomatic passport, deep blue embossed seal gold lettering. He held it towards her in silence. Amelie leaned forward. Her eyes read the text. Then she blinked once, twice. Her lips opened. It read, Traoré. The president revealed Ibrahim, President, Republic of Burkina Faso. A sudden gasp rippled through row 13. Someone made a sound. A man in row 11 dropped his earbuds. A woman whispered, "Oh my God." Not out of fear this time, but shocked amazement. Jessica's phone rang with a string of new comments. One of them said, "You just mocked the president of Burkina Faso." Another, "That man you called a terrorist just saved your life." Jessica's face turned pale. Carter's white as linen. Keanu said nothing, but his look toward Carter was enough. Carter started. "I didn't know." Ibrahim stuffed the passport back into his coat. "That's the issue," Keanu responded, calm and pointed. "You didn't know, but you believed you did." Quiet silence rolled over them again, like the wave in front of the storm breaks, only now. It wasn't breaking against Ibrahim. It broke against those who had spoken behind people's backs, on those who had laughed behind people's backs, on those who had judged the cabin shifted. Keanu nodded, Ibrahim low and silent. "You didn't flinch," he stated. While the rest of them pointed fingers, Ibrahim answered with a simple, "Old habit comes with the uniform." And so he sat back down, calm, composed, not triumphant, because he didn't have to win. He already had the cabin lights dim to a warm glow as the plane cruised silently above the Alps. Outside the windows, snow-capped peaks glistened beneath the fading sun. But inside, there was no peace. Not for Carter Langston. He sat stiffly in 14. Arms crossed, jaw, locked, his thousand suit, stuck wetly to his body. Tainted. With Bordeaux and something much worse, shame, he could feel it. The eyes, the change in demeanor from fellow travelers who had laughed along with him before, but leaned back now a little, as if they hadn't. The laughter that had previously aligned with his jokes was now razor blades turned against him. Jessica hadn't spoken since the revelation. She gazed at her screen, removing clips from her live stream, too late to prevent what had already gone viral across the aisle. Keanu sat quietly, calm but unreadable, and Ibrahim still, always still. Carter finally snapped, "So what? Now I'm the villain," he said, his voice low but bitter. "I made an assumption I wasn't the only one." Keanu didn't even glance at him. "You weren't just wrong," he said. "You were loud." Carter scoffed, leaning forward. "You expect me to apologize for being cautious, for protecting people?" Keanu turned to him now slowly. "You didn't point at the man with the bag." He said, "You pointed at the man with dark skin and a jacket you didn't understand. You used fear as an excuse to feed your ego." Carter faltered, mouth half open, looking for something that could save him. Nothing came. Then Amelie stepped forward again. This time, not as a flight attendant, but as a person who had suffered enough. She had a fresh bottle of Bordeaux in both hands, and placed it on the tray table in front of Carter with a soft clink. He glanced up, flummoxed. "I didn't ask for, I know." She spoke over him with a seldom-used quiet firmness. "But I thought you could use a glass." Then she leaned forward, a little of humility. Sighs rippled quietly through the nearby rows. One man let out a breath he'd been holding. A woman, too, sits down, whispered, "God, that was good." Carter remained silent. Emily walked away, her back straighter than ever. Ibrahim didn't even look back. He didn't have to. He'd spoken enough without saying anything at all. Keanu put his arm on the communal armrest and breathed heavily in. "You know what I've learned?" he said to himself. "More than anyone else. The more invisible a man becomes, the more people show you who they are." Carter shifted in his seat, visibly compressing. Jessica's eyes closed, and the burden of each careless phrase, each withheld judgment, sank into the hush like gravity. This wasn't turbulence. This was truth. And in row 14, truth was heavier than any baggage in the hold. The captain's voice chimed over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've started our descent into Geneva. Local time is 6:27 p.m. The weather is fine. We thank you for flying with us." But nobody reached for their seatbelt. Nobody moved their tray table. The cabin was already falling emotionally, morally, as a group long before the wheels ever touched the ground. Jessica sat slumped in her seat, gazing at the home screen of her phone as if it had betrayed her. Her comment section was still blowing up. "You just mocked a sitting president. You owe him and the whole continent an apology unfollowed forever." Even her boyfriend, who had been recording snide responses earlier, now positioned away from her, like she was infectious. Carter Langston was no better. He hadn't uttered a word since Amelie presented him with a bottle of Bordeaux with a E. Side of dignity, his hands fluttered helplessly in his lap, stained fingers twirling his cloth napkin back and forth like a rosary of regret. Then footsteps, two men in dark suits boarded through the front cabin door, moments before docking. Not aggressive, not in uniform, just precise, purposeful. They walked directly to row 14. One of them stopped at Carter's seat and leaned forward, flashing an air marshal's badge discreetly. "Mr. Langston," he said softly, "we'd like a moment of your time after landing." Carter raised his head. Pale for what? The man's tone was calm, professional passenger conduct violations, including incitement, verbal aggression, and false consequences upon landing. Accusation of a federal threat standard air safety review. The words struck like a final pressurization. Carter nodded stiffly. The plane landed seconds afterward, soft, clean, and quiet, as the jet bridge engaged itself. The cabin didn't explode with its typical bedlam. There were no clattering seatbelts, no scramble for overhead compartments. Just quietness. People weren't ready to disembark. They were still drinking in who they had been. The air marshal motioned, "Please come with us." Carter rose slowly. His shining shoes scuffed a little as he made his way into the aisle. He didn't glance at Keanu. He didn't gaze at Ibrahim. He did not glance at either man. He went walking, stumbling, defeated, and quite suddenly much diminished. As he moved, he said a lone word under his breath. "Apologies." Neither man spoke. The true sentence had been uttered, and it did not require cuffs up front. In the cabin, co-pilot showed up and walked over to Ibrahim and Keanu with muted authority. "We have arranged to have you two disembark discreetly by the diplomatic corridor. If that sounds okay." Ibrahim nodded respectfully. Keanu nodded a smile. A simple, grateful smile. They gathered their belongings, little to talk about, only a canvas backpack and a peaceful presence, and trailed after the co-pilot through the curtain and off a step. A little girl who stood beside the gate struck off from her mother, and approached Ibrahim, holding a teddy bear. She peered up with broad, unspoken eyes. "Thank you, Mista." Ibrahim knelt slightly with a hand on her shoulder. "You're safe. Now, that's what matters." She embraced the bear more closely, and in a flash, the man they'd feared departed. As the man they'd never forget, the sun had slipped behind the Jurem Mountains as the terminal lights began to flicker, casting long golden rays across the tarmac within the private corridor away from the gawking travelers and whispers of remorse. Ibrahim Traoré paced silently alongside Keanu Reeves. No press, no photographers, but only quiet strides and the soft echo of dignity. Neither man spoke, since neither had to. What occurred on Flight 227 was no longer just an aircraft. It had turned into a mirror, and not everyone enjoyed what they saw in it. As they approached the diplomatic lounge, Keanu looked back for the last time at the aircraft. Through the glass wall, he could still notice the silhouettes of passengers disembarking, some hurried quickly, eyes downcast. Others stood to glance in the direction of the restricted corridor, as if expecting absolution. It wouldn't be from him, some folks. Keanu said softly, "Sit in first class because they paid the seat." Ibrahim nodded, and some Keanu went on, because they worked for it. They quit next to a security checkpoint. An agent nodded respectfully at Ibrahim and stepped aside. A protocol officer approached with a tablet, ready to escort the president through niceties. But Ibrahim stopped. He turned to Keanu and extended his hand. Firm, strong mercy. He said, for not stepping aside. Keanu shook it. "Thank you for not stepping back behind them." In row 14, only echoes remained. Carter Langston had been escorted off the plane minutes before, not in cuffs, but in consequence. Jessica's account was already trending, but not for reasons she wanted, and Amelie, the flight attendant who once apologized for her accent, was now being recommended for a leadership combination. Justice hadn't been shouted. It had arrived quietly, clothed in dignity. Not every threat carries wires and blinking lights. Some come disguised as laughter, as smug confidence, as just being cautious. This flight didn't just show us a hero. It showed us ourselves. What we assume, what we fear, what we fail to see. Until it's almost too late, Ibrahim was judged not by his actions, but by his appearance. And Keanu dismissed, because he didn't look like someone worth respecting. But the truth always finds altitude. And when it does, it humbles. Have you ever been judged by how you looked, where you're from, or how you speak? Or maybe have you caught yourself judging someone too quickly? Drop your story in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from. Because truth, like this, deserves to travel. And if this story moved, you share it. The world needs reminders like this, because sometimes the greatest turbulence isn't in the skies. It's in the human heart, and only truth can deliver it safely.